Printed on the back of your bulletin. It's actually not what I'm going to be reading. I will be reading, I know, you're welcome. Actually, you can thank Pastor Tom for that one. So this morning I'll be reading from the book of Exodus, the 20th chapter, verses 4 through 6. No carved gods of any size, shape, or form of anything whatever, whether of things that fly or walk or swim. Don't bow down to them and don't serve them, because I am God, your God, and I'm a most jealous God, punishing the children for any sins their parents pass on to them to the third, and yes, even to the fourth generation of those who hate me. But I am unswervingly loyal to the thousands who love me and keep my commandments.
It's really tough dealing with the help these days, because I got here and Sarah said, "A whole chapter? You want me to read a whole chapter?" That's pretty much word for word. And I thought, you know what I ended up needing to do, because this morning we had a service in the chapel in the woods that included praying for and sending out the young people and those who are going with them on their mission trip this week. And in that service, I had a shorter sermon. It had a shorter scripture. It had a shorter run. It had fewer parts and pieces. And so I said to her, well, what do you think we should do? She said, I'll give people their choice. Do you want to hear 3 verses, or do you want to hear a whole doggone chapter? Not word for word, but it's kind of the point. And so when you asked the question that way, you heard 3 verses. Stone tablets, wireless world. What on earth is there for us in something that got its beginning millennia ago? Last week we heard from Pastor Mebane about the first commandment, no other gods before me. God and the people of Israel have made a covenant. God is in the process of leading these people out of an existence that is based on their being enslaved, on giving their labor for nothing in return, on difficulties, struggles, and troubles. And God has said, this is not right, and I am going to give you a better place and a better life. And so now they're out going across this wide wilderness, kind of desert area. And God and the people of Israel have said, we're going to make a covenant with each other. You be our God, we'll be your people. And God says, I will be your God, you be my people. When they get done with that, they ask, so what? What does that mean? How do we go about doing this? And God has spent some time with Moses, and Moses has come back with 10 instructions for people. And what we're doing is we're taking that thousands of year old set of instructions, the basic business of being in a covenant with God, and we're seeing how it fits in our world today. No other gods. That's the first one. And the second one says, no images. No images of me, God. Now, I'm coming to you as a person who had a life before I became one of your pastors here. And my life involved images and imaging and all of the stuff that has to do with that. I worked for the West Ohio Conference, and I edited and published a newspaper. And that newspaper had images in it. And I produced audio and video programs, and I spent quite a lot of time consulting with congregations and with organizations in the church to help them present themselves in the way that they would like to be presented and known by people around. Now, I just saw Jay Carney on television this week. They had an interview kind of an exit interview because he is leaving off being the White House press secretary. Have you seen him at news conferences? They have news conferences where the various news media and their representatives come and they get to ask this guy questions, and he's the one who is responsible for the president's image. That's a difficult job. That's a really difficult job. I only had to be responsible for the image of 3 bishops, and that was enough over a period of time. But it's important. The images that we make use of, the images that we experience, the pictures in our minds, the things in the world around us that come to us. Now, images today are easy to come by. As a matter of fact, Pastor Mebane talked last week about a selfie culture. How many of you will admit to have taken selfies? How many of you will admit to having taken selfies that would got you in trouble if they were ever white? No, I won't. I won't say that. We all know the stories about that kind of thing. You know, I come from a time when images involved quite a lot of work. Any image was a real task. You don't take selfies with something like this because you got to be on this side to work it. You got to look at what it is you're going to get an image of, and you've got to know how to work the dials and the controls, and you got to know how to work the equipment in order to get that image. And the images that we got with things like this in those days, for a long time through history, it was very hard to get one, and they were therefore very valuable. They were valued images because they were tough to come by. The fewer of anything you have, the more valuable every individual one is. The more you have, the less valuable any individual one becomes. And that's, in part at least, what this commandment is about. I headed to the place where we store family pictures to show you the kind of valuable images that come from those days. These are my mother's parents, Effie and Absalom Snyder. They had this taken in a photo studio, I think it says Shelby, Ohio there, many years ago. It was the kind of place where to get an image like this, you really had to do a lot. You had to go to the place where the photographer was. You had to sit still for a very long time. Matter of fact, in some of those early days, they actually clamped your head so you couldn't move and thereby spoil the picture. One of the reasons they looked like that, I don't think they always looked like that, was because if you smiled and your face moved, the picture wouldn't be right. So you were very, very serious. That's what you did. Now, clearly this is a valued picture. It hasn't been cared for perfectly, but it has come down to us from a long time ago. And we can still see their stern visages. That was an image that was very valuable. But what's happening in the world today? Images are cheap. Images are easy. You want to take a picture of something, you hold up your phone or you hold up your tablet computer. You want to take a picture of yourself, you hold up your phone or hold up your tablet computer. If your arms are long enough, you can get yourself and a good deal of whatever's behind you. That makes images easy to come by, and because images are easy to come by now, they're not individually as valued or as valuable as they used to be. All those images from everywhere, all you got to do is log on or sign up, and you are going to be inundated with images. Inundated. Constantly, continuously. Pictures and ideas and videos and stuff like that. And when there are that many, the task, it's like trying to get a drink of water from a fire hose. The task is to sort and not to be overcome by the sheer volume of the things that are coming at you. So I said to people during this past week, I said, I'm supposed to preach on the second commandment. I do this a lot, actually. I'm getting to the point where I crowdsource sermons, and it works really well. because you get ideas that I got some ideas that I never would have thought of myself, and I'm not going to tell you any of those, but they were ideas that I never would have thought of myself. And I said, what are the images? What are the older translations say, no graven images? The word from which that comes actually translates best into English as carve, no carved images. So you don't make something that is an image of what walks or crawls or swims or flies as an image for God. So I said to people, what are the graven images of today? What do you suppose the answer I got most often was? Computer? Yeah, images on a computer. What are the images of? Selfies. There are a lot of selfies. You bet. That was one of the things that a couple of people said. Yeah, selfies. Picture of me. This is me. This is who I am. This is what I'm about. The other thing that they said was celebrities. What does it take to be a celebrity today? Mostly you got to have your picture in a lot of places. Your image has to be inescapable, and then you're celebrated. And the more celebrated you are, the more celebrated you can become. And for a lot of people, that's the dream. To be famous for being famous. To be known for being known. To be who they are, and therefore to be famous. I believe that we have this commandment in this form because God knew a lot about human tendencies. We're not comfortable with an understanding of God that doesn't have some kind of image associated with it. So these people who were out there being led, they're on their way now to a place that God has promised, which they don't know. They've heard about that from their ancestors, well, from a lot of generations back, because they've been gone several hundred years from that area. They've heard about this, but they don't know it. And so they go. And what do they have to follow to get there? When God appears to lead them, it is as a fire. When God appears in the daytime, it's like a cloud. It's pretty hard to understand what God is like when the only things you have are shapeless forms to deal with. It's only 12 chapters after this that Moses goes back up on that mountain, and he's gone a very long time. I believe the text says 40 days. Anytime you hear 40 during that time in the Bible, we would say a very long time. 40 days. He was gone for 40 days. Well, we'd say forever and a day. It seemed like he was never going to get back. And people got nervous about that. They wondered if something had happened to Moses. They wondered if something had happened to God. They wondered if something had gone wrong with this whole process. And so, this is in chapter 32, they started talking to Moses' brother, who was one of their other leaders, and said, we really need something we can see. We need something we can look at. We need some kind of image that will help us get along while we're waiting for Moses to come back. And so Aaron and the people who worked with him gathered up all the jewelry, all the gold ornaments, all the trinkets, all the things like that. They melted them all down and they shaped them generally into the shape of a calf, a bull calf made of gold. Now, this is supposed to remind people that they have a God who is greater than they are. Supposed to. And the drawback anytime you have an image like that is that it begins to shape your perceptions, and it takes away the things that you otherwise might know. And so, this commandment reminds us that any time we decide what it is we want to see in God, what it is we want to know about God, what kind of image we want to have about God, we are giving away or putting away or losing a whole bunch of other stuff. Now, of course, the value of a bull calf is that it's strong. It's got the promise of strength and power. It has an implication of ability. that's a pretty important thing to know about God, because we believe that God is powerful. We believe that God will do what God will do. We believe that God is strong enough to overcome any difficulty. God is strong enough to take care of any problem. God is strong. But you know what it doesn't have anything to do with? It doesn't have anything to do with God's love. It doesn't have anything to do with God hugging us and holding us close. It doesn't have anything to do with God teaching us, with God helping us to understand how to live life in the way God wants us to live it. And so when they started to worship and celebrate that image they had made for themselves, what happened? Well, it all got to be about strong. And it all got to be about power. So on they went. And it happened again and again. People would say, we need an image of some sort. We need something that we can relate to. Some of the kings and queens, if you read some of the history through there, they said, we'd rather worship. We'd rather have people worship the gods that come from other places or other groups of people. We want to have something that we can touch, something we can see. Now these folks were not silly. They didn't believe that because you had something made of wood or something made of metal or something made of stone that was the thing. But those other deities, before long, for some of the people who worshipped them, became so identified with what they had seen that they couldn't imagine anything else, and they couldn't understand anything more. What bothered a lot of people when Jesus began to teach and preach, when Jesus began to travel about and heal, when Jesus began to confront those who were taking advantage of others, when Jesus began to say to people, this is how God is, the thing that bothered a lot of people about that was the fact that there were followers of his who said he was the image of God. This is the image of God. This is the way God wants us to be, like Jesus. This is the way God expects us to live, like Jesus. This is the outlook God expects us to have, like Jesus. For most of the folks in those days, God insisted on justice. God insisted on fairness. God insisted on even-handedness. If you did something wrong, you needed to do something to deal with the fact that you had done something wrong. If you were out of place, if you were out of sorts, you needed to do something to change that in order to kind of get back in God's good graces. And it got so difficult, and it got so problematic, and it got so full time to do that almost nobody had the time to do it, because they needed to keep alive in an economy that demanded that everybody work hard. And Jesus came, and Jesus proclaimed that God loved them, that God would welcome them, that God offered grace and mercy, and that it wasn't just a fact of always doing the right thing to even up the score, to settle the books, to make it okay again, that God loved them. In fact, Jesus was so committed to making that point that as he encountered opposition, as he faced difficulty, as people rose up to say, we don't agree with that, that's not our idea of God. Our idea of God is the idea of God that we've always had. That God can't be seen in a human being, not in the way those who follow you and agree with you say that can be done. And Jesus went right on doing that to the point that he was killed for what he believed, for what he lived, but not for long. And that's the story. That's the story that we have that lets us know that we have seen the image of God in Jesus. You notice we don't have any generally agreed of pictures of Jesus. I mean, Google images of Jesus. And I tell you, you can spend a long time looking at all the pictures, looking at all the ideas, looking at all the artists' renderings and all that kind of stuff. It wasn't so much a look as it was a life. We tend to kind of skate over the end of these verses because there is that part where God says, I am a jealous God, and if you turn me down, if you don't obey, if you don't follow the way, it's going to be bad for you. It's going to be bad for your children. It's going to be bad for your grandchildren. It's going to be bad for your great-grandchildren. If my great-grandparents had displeased God, according to that, things would be really bad for me. But we kind of forget the very last verse. Because God says, but I am faithful forever to those who follow my way. And that's the image of God in Jesus. The image of God in Jesus is that God is the one who welcomes us, that God is the one who forgives us, that God is the one who offers us grace, that God is the one who offers us another chance, a new opportunity. And this comes to us from the one who was as God as you can be and still was human, and who was as human as you can be and still was God. You want to know about the image of God? The image of God does not involve anything that crawls or walks or flies or swims. That's not nearly enough to encompass God's image, which is pure love, love, love.